There we are. I'm consenting to be recorded. I am certainly consenting to be recorded.
Okay. So Boris, I want to introduce you to Boris Starling, who is a brilliant author and novelist whose books have included Vodka and Messiah, which I'm sure you will all have read or watched. It was then turned into a brilliant TV series. Boris now ghostwrites as well for great sporting stars like Sam Warburton. And his latest book he's ghostwritten for is with Frankie Dettori. So, hi Boris, thank you so much
My pleasure.
for talking to me. It's brilliant. So, just tell me, how did it all come about with writing for Frankie?
It came about because I've done quite a few books with HarperCollins, sort of ghostwriting books. This is the fifth I've done with them. Well, four ghostwritten plus. I started off, I did one called Unconquerable about the Invictus Games. And from there, we did Sam Warburton. I did a guy called Jay Morton, who was in the SAS, who was on Who Dares Wings, called Soldier. I did Sia Khaleesi, the Springbok rugby captain, the first black captain of the Springboks, which was obviously, for a long time, one of the sort of bastions of apartheid, the Springboks all-white team. And Sia's story of, overcoming township upbringing and terrible poverty and violence is fairly incredible. Yeah. And then Ollie, the publisher, rang up and said, mate, what do you know about racing? And so I turned up the bluffometer quite high and said, I did Dick Francis on Mastermind years ago because I love Dick Francis books, which is pretty much the be-all and end-all of my racing knowledge. I didn't know that some some races have hurdles and some don't. But that was that. And so he said, do you want to talk to Frankie about doing his book? And I said, sure. So we had a Zoom like this, me in Dorset on a day roughly 30 degrees cooler than it is today. Yeah. Frankie in Miami on a day roughly the same as it is today here. Yeah. And just chatted away. And then there was Ollie, then there was Pete, Frankie's agent. And yeah, we decided to do it. And, he was such, he's such an amazing character, Frankie, and an amazing jockey, and has such an amazing story that it was a no-brainer. It was something that I really, really wanted to do, and has been really good fun to do.
I bet. And did you meet him face to face, or was it always over Zoom?
No, I had met him face to face. I went to lunch with him in his house in between Newmarket and Cambridge back in April, which was just sort of very typical Frankie. There was just like wife and kids there, and sort of the first thing I did when I arrived was to help bring in the supermarket shopping because you know what it's like. There's a family there, and if you're there, you muck in. So we just chatted away about things, had lunch, watched a bit of racing, met the emus. He's got a pair of emus.
Emus? Oh my goodness!
Terrifying. They're absolutely terrifying.
I bet they try and attack you.
Well, no, they do. But he did say stay with me and don't make eye contact with them. And,
for goodness sake!
They have attacked him before.
Really?
He beat them off with his man bag. But no, but also I got a sense of being in his house. Not just obviously the trappings of a very successful jockey, but also going into he has like a little sort of office cum training room, which is always turned up, very hot, where he will go on the treadmill, where he has a little sort of, I don't even know what you call it, one of those leather horses that, that he sits on to maintain his balance, to maintain his leg muscles and so on. And he works damn hard at what he does, which is one of the reasons he's so good.
Yes.
For a lot of people who don't really follow racing, a lot of people sort of presume he's semi-retired and so on. And I've gone, no, not only is he still going at the age of 50, but he is one of the best in the business.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And one of the best there's ever been.
Yeah.
I think John Gosden called it, called him the best big race jockey in history.
I should think he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And what have you found? What did you find most fascinating in getting to know Frankie as a person?
I think lots of things. Firstly, the whole sort of racing subculture that I didn't really know about, I found really, really interesting, and especially the sort of the way that racing is very egalitarian. People have this image of it as an incredibly posh sport, full of lords and ladies, and then a lot of obviously the sort of the very rich Arab owners as well. That side of it. But actually, that old adage, all men are equal above and below the turf. I went to Epsom to watch him in the Derby last month. And as at any race course, all elements of society are there. Everyone rubs along. No one cares. And I know that from looking at Newmarket, there's a lot of helpful kids from troubled backgrounds and so on in Newmarket. Imran Shawani, who was groom of Enable, who Frankie's favorite ever horse. Imran came over from Pakistan, didn't speak any English, never ridden a horse. Spent the first 3 months at Clare Haven stables learning English and falling off horses, and then he ends up being groom of the most famous horse in the world. And
amazing.
It's those are the stories that don't really get told that often, and that was what I really enjoyed. So that was a subculture around it. But with Frankie, he has lived many lives, and there have been a lot of ups and downs, which of course is manner to a ghostwriter. You think of the things that he's most famous for, the Magnificent Seven at Ascot.
Yes.
And, which is still, 25 years on.
We all remember it.
Taxi driver from Cambridge Station. That's when he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "To have lunch with Frankie Dettori." He said, "Oh, tell him you want me a packet on, in Ascot." And that's what he said every week. Someone will say something like that to him. Then of course, he nearly lost his life in the plane crash in Newmarket in 2000. Then he had the fallout with Godolphin, got busted for cocaine. Couldn't beg a ride, basically. Couldn't beg, borrow, or steal a ride when he came back. Got back in with John, won the Derby on Golden Horn in 2015. After he'd been written off. This is proper hero's journey stuff. This is the basis of storytelling.
Massive ups and downs.
Yeah, and and he's still there. And being Frankie, I'm sure there'll be a few more along the way.
Yeah. And would you say that his character is as flamboyant as it appears to be to us in the outside world?
Definitely, but he definitely is. That's very much him. He's very much the showman, and I think a lot of it obviously is just his innate character, and a lot of it is being Italian as well and wearing his heart on his sleeve. Also, he's very aware of his responsibility to racing. It's a spectator sport. People pay good money to come and watch you. And he says that on the days he doesn't do the flying dismounts, there'll always be some kid in the crowd going, "Mummy, why isn't that man jumping off the horse?" So there is that flamboyance, but also he's a very serious person when he needs to be. He takes his work very seriously. He's incredibly dedicated and intelligent at reading a race. And the only person I've really come across who has that sort of innate intelligence in a different sport is the cyclist Mark Cavendish. Who can talk you through, has total recall of the last 5K of any sprint. Frankie has total recall of his big races, and he will tell you, who was where and where the gap opened up and what his tactics were, what his thinking was. All these things are happening in the blink of an eye, and his supercomputer racing brain downloads it. And the other thing that springs to mind is again something that John said was that a lot of jockeys are very good afternoon riders, but very few of them are good morning riders as well. And Frankie's a very good morning rider. He'll go and ride works, and his feedback about the horse, again, to swap sports a bit, is very much what Lewis Hamilton's team will say, or Ayrton Senna's team said. He gives them proper feedback, which is really helpful.
Which is vitally
totally. And so he's not one of those guys who just turns up and does the business and then goes home again. He really lives it.
Yeah. And going back to his famous flying dismounts, how do you know how they materialized?
They did. They came from a writer called Angel Cabrero in America. I think he spent some time in America as a young writer, must be sort of early to mid 90s, and I think he picked it up there. And there was a lot of sniffiness about it when he first did it, and all the old stuffed shirts. But he does it, and they're saying, "Oh, it's bad for the horse, it's bad for his knees," and so on. And I'm sure at the far side of 50 now, his knees will probably thank him for not doing it.
Yes.
He only does it with Group 1 races now, and I think he makes sure the turf is soft and it's what he's known for, and he still wins more than enough to wheel it out quite a few times a year.
Yeah, no, it's great. Everyone loves seeing that, I think. And did you spend as at any stage a lot of time sort of shadowing Frankie and his daily
No, not really. I mean,
routine to get to
not
know?
really. Obviously, we were doing a lot of stuff on Zoom. In a lot of it was lockdown.
Oh God, of
Also, a
course.
lot of it he was away. He was in Bahrain for the first 3 months
Yes.
riding out there. So no, we had to do it mainly by Zoom. But I got a pretty good sense of his daily routine and so on, and what it involves. And even the time out going to meet him, you say, well, I'm gonna go ride out at 6:30, and I come back, have a sleep. And it's a sort of it's a weird routine on the grounds, and it's not the routine that's a sort of 9 to 5, but
No.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
And so now I definitely got a sense of what it involves and what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say that there's a special trait? I mean, you talked about, he's got a very quick brain and great recall, but that makes Frankie the amazing jockey he is.
I think lots of things. I think certainly his intelligence, certainly especially his empathy with the horses. That's come up a lot of times when talking to people, that he switches on to a horse's mood very, very fast.
Yeah.
He will say the same thing. It works both ways. That he'll say that if he's would go riding, if he's had an argument with Kathy, or something stressing him, he'll have to deliberately sort of decompress. Otherwise, the horse will pick up on his stress.
Yeah.
And then you might as well not bother. Those two, determination as well. Having been through his bad times, there's a lot of resilience needed to come through them. I mean, after the Coke bust and the split with Godolphin, he said there was a time when Kath would say to him, you keep telling us how effing great you are. Now's the time to go out and prove it. And,
Yes. Yeah.
So all that, and I think he's. And I think most of all, it's just in his blood. He tells a story of, and obviously we put it in. You remember when he was a Question of Sport captain?
Yeah.
It's 2003, I think. And one of the guys in his team was a French rugby player called Thomas Castagnet. And they were just chatting, in the green room. And Thomas goes, "So how long have you been retired?" And Frankie was like, "Oh, okay. Is that how people see me?" This is the time he was still only a young man. He was still only early 30s. But he just thought, that I want to be, I don't want to be the sort of guy who's just doing stuff on TV in the sort of netherworld of that. I think he is a jockey. He's a jockey deep down to his bones and his soul, and it's there. And I think that that drives him still at 50 to get up and do it every day at a time when lots of people would have packed it in.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot left in him yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, he 2 years ago he was saying, "I'm going to 50." Now he says, "I'll go on to I still enjoy it." I mean, Leicester was doing it at 58, 59, and Frankie's like, give him a challenge. It's like a red rag to a bull.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
But he's still in good shape. So there's no reason why he couldn't go on.
No, exactly. And do you think that sort of getting to know Frankie, did you discover any sort of vulnerability about him that you didn't know he had you got to know him?
Not really sort of beyond the sort of normal. I mean, all top sportsmen have got a sort of vulnerability. I think that's, the vulnerability is also their strength. It's what drives them. It's the, it's what gets them out of bed in the morning. And I think it's, with all of them, it's a fear of failure. I think he would say that, like a lot of sportsmen, you get better at accepting failure as life goes on. You're just even as a jockey, even the best, what's their win ratio? 1 in 5. That means 4 out of 5 races you're not going to be first across the line, and if you let that in, you're not going to last very long.
No.
So I think I think he would say that with age has sort of become more of an equanimity. That's also come, I think, from the effect of the plane crash. He said after that he stopped chasing. He'd been champion jockey twice. To be champion jockey is to ride more wins than everybody else, and there's no, you can end up just chasing your tail round, one man in his dog meetings just to get the wins in. I think after that he thought, right, there's more to life than this.
Yeah.
Now he picks and chooses much more. He'll only really ride the big races for the ones near him, because he's earned the right to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's fair enough. And when do you think Frankie was at his best? when does he think he was at his
Oh,
best? Maybe he hasn't reached his best.
That's a good question.
20s, 30s, 40s, I don't know.
That's a good question. I think you could make a good case for at any time. I think his style of writing and some of his personality have probably changed. That as he's lost a bit of physical strength and stamina, although not that much, his experience has come to the fore. He's really race smart. He's really canny. I would say he's writing, probably as well now as he has. I mean, I don't know what you would say. That's a good question. I think, I think a lot of it also depends on the horses as well.
Yeah.
But I think I know in one respect he would say that his most I know that he would say that his most rewarding partnership was definitely Enable, which has been the last few years.
What a partnership that was.
And that came on the back of Golden Horn, and he said, after they won the Derby in 2015, he said to John Godson, we're never going to find another horse like this. And along comes Enable.
And then, it's amazing, isn't it?
And he gets very emotional talking about it. I mean, we did one session entirely on Enable, and he was practically in tears by the end. And he used to go around the stables and just give her polos on it, of an afternoon and say, I'm off to see my woman. And the stable boys would go, here's Dettori, come to mean around Enable.
It's sweet.
Yeah, very, very sweet, but very, very genuine, heartfelt love.
Yeah. Because actually that's what I was going to ask you next. They've obviously they've had, or they still have, a very strong special emotional bond, and he must have found it a real wrench to
he did.
when he retired. It must have been
he did. I mean, he did. She ran, I think, 19 times, and he was on her for all but the first two. So they had a huge amount of success. They had 2 Arcs, George VI, Breeders' Cup. I think the first ever horse to do the Breeders and Arc double in the same year.
Yes,
but I think it was a slow burn that I think it was a few races in before they really started to click emotionally, if that makes sense. And then she would sort of take him to places emotionally that he hadn't been, and vice versa. I think in lots of respects they're quite similar. That she clearly thrived off the attention and the environment of those big races. He would say that you would sit on her going down to the start and just feel her ears prick up and the whole surge go through her body, like go, here we are. This is what we're here to do.
The showman and the showgirl.
Really, very much the showman and the showgirl.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely a lot in that. And of course, she had a season more than they thought because they kept her going until she was 5, I think. And had it not been for very wet, very soft ground in her final arc, she'd have probably won that and done the triple 3 arcs in a row. But it was not to be.
That was such a pity. Such a pity.
But
we were willing her.
But that's, and he said to John after that, I'd like to ride her one more time, but I don't want my last ride on her to be on the back of a defeat. And so obviously, he didn't go and gallop her on the heath because she was being retired, but just rode her around the stables, and he and the entire yard were in tears. And he's a pretty special horse that does that to people.
Very special, very special. And Boris, have you sort of got to know a bit more about his sort of family life, and his life outside of the spotlight?
Yes, I mean, he's very open about this, not just with me, but with other things. His dad was champion jockey in Italy for many years. He's got 5 kids.
Gosh, so many kids. Good on him. Don't know how he does it.
And so he's very, he's a family man, and he enjoys being with them and hanging out with them and so on. He appears on TV stuff, and he does. He keeps his profile high and so on.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Okay, cool. And what would you say is the most surprising revelation you've learned about him?
I wouldn't say it's surprising, but I was struck by how easy it is not to see below the surface of
Yes.
him. You know, you can look at and I've always thought of it as there's almost two personalities. There's Frankie, who is the showman, who's the public figure, you know, who's the joker,
Yeah.
whatever. And then there's I think of the other character as El Dettori, that Franco Dettori. That says El Dettori on his writing pictures. And El Dettori is a jockey, and El Dettori works very, very hard. You know, and there's a lot of substance to go
Yes.
with the style. So that wasn't surprising as such, but it was very revealing about the kind of guy he is and what it takes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And can you recall any funny stories you've heard about Frankie?
The one that he always enjoys telling is Ascot, when he was riding obviously every day of the week at Royal Ascot, and obviously he would meet the Queen, and the first time he met the Queen, Lord Porchester sort of, you know, took him aside and said, you know, here's the protocol, here's how you greet her, you know,
Yeah.
don't speak unless spoken to, and so on. So, you know, and so every day, you know, he would sort of see her after the races or whatever, and he would always, you know, mind his P's and Q's and so on. And then on the Saturday, I don't think he expected her to turn up, and suddenly he was, I don't know whether he'd won or he was in the parade ring or something, and suddenly there was the Queen, and he said, I just totally forgot what I was supposed to do and just went, how are you?
Oh
Like,
my God.
the Cockney accent that wouldn't have shamed Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins. And anyways, the Queen took it in good
Did the
part.
Queen say anything?
I think she just smiled. I'm sure she's very used to it.
Only
You know,
Frankie could probably get away with it.
exactly. I think he gets away with a lot by being Frankie, you know, and by being effervescent and
Yeah.
charming and so
Yeah.
on.
And what do you think Frankie, any indication what Frankie might do when his career as a jockey?
Well, that's the question. You know, there's always that saying about sportsmen. You know, they die twice. The first time is when they retire. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure he does. I think he would like to keep it going for a few years. You know, A, because he can.
Before
B,
thinking about that.
yeah, exactly, and B, to avoid thinking about that.
Well, of course. I think any sportsman doesn't want to think about that.
Exactly.
It's
I mean,
a difficult one, isn't it? It's tough.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, with racing you can go on a long time, much longer than, you know, than footballers, rugby players, cricketers, and so on. So,
well, exactly.
I don't know what he will do. I don't know if he knows what he will. I mean, he will certainly never be short of options. But I think for the time being, he would just say that he's still enjoying it. He's still good enough to be at the top of his game, and any questions
exactly.
for the future.
Not cross that bridge.
Exactly. The bridge, I think the bridge is in the distance still.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And what would you say you most enjoyed about ghostwriting this particular book?
Again, I think just the sort of resonance of his story, the ups and downs, the richness of his life. You know, not just in racing, but outside of racing, and the downs make the ups, you know, much sweeter. I mean, I always try, whenever I write a sports book, to start with the build up to something big. I say I always try. That's just the way it's worked with Sam Wolverton. We did it the night before the second Lions test in New Zealand, when it all got too much for him. He was on the phone to his mum at 2 a.m. saying, "I want to come home."
No.
And he told me that on the very first morning of our sessions, and I wrote prologue in big letters on my pad, and he laughed. And I said, "This is perfect. This is exactly what people." With Sia, it was, you know, the build up to the World Cup final, which meant so much to South Africa. And with Frankie, I think I'm starting with the one of before the 2015 derby, his first derby since before his ban. You know, he hadn't even got a ride even though he'd been available, hadn't got a ride the last 2 years. He said the kids were old enough to know what it was about, and he left the house saying, you know, with banners saying "Good luck, Daddy." Walked the course with John, and just, you know, and Golden Horn was favourite, and just the sense that, you know, this was his chance. You know, he was back, and he said that was the only race where he'd lost feeling in his body afterwards, where he just the emotional overload was such that it basically called shutdown, and that was such a sort of resonant thing. And, you know, that was, you know, it's filming, it's film stuff. It's incredible.
Yeah.
You know,
It's incredible.
Yeah. the
And
rise, fall and rise.
yeah, yeah. And do you think Frankie's autobiography might be made into a film?
I don't know.
Could be a great film.
There's a documentary coming out because I've been working a bit with documentary makers about it. Whether it would be a feature film, I don't know. I mean,
No.
there is a decent history of racing films. I mean, there's Seabiscuit, there's
Yes.
Champions, National Velvet. I know National Velvet isn't real, but
Yeah, they're all great. Those films.
so
Love a good racing film.
yes, I would never say never.
No.
Whether it be about his life as such or centered around one thing or another, I don't know. But yes, certainly if I was a film producer, I would be keeping an eye on this one.
Yeah, yeah. And when will this book be released?
It's released in October.
Okay.
So good Christmas present for all your racing mad friends.
Absolutely. And I'm very happy to obviously promote it on Grapevine.
Thank you. It's called Leap of Faith. Obviously, with not just for him leaping off the thing, but the leap of faith that he took in coming back, that John Gosden took in rehiring him at a time when most other people didn't want to, and a lot of that. So it's an amazing story, and he's an amazing.
I can't wait to read it. And will people be able to get signed copies?
Yes, I know that. I'm sure there will be. I know there'll be signed copies. I presume COVID restrictions allowing, he might do a few signings. I mean, I'll certainly imagine there'll be some signings in New York and Cambridge, if nothing else. Because and that's where they know. Well,
it'll be perfect Christmas present for everyone, I think. And is so if somebody called you up and said, Boris, can you help me write my autobiography? Who would you want it to be?
Who would I most want it to be?
Yeah. Who would you most want it to be?
I would really like to do, especially if, having been fourth in 2018, third in the Nations League in 2019, second this time, especially if they won the World Cup next year, I would really like to do Gareth Southgate. Because I think not just for the success, but I think his forms of leadership and team building and inspiration are really interesting and resonant and so on. And he's a very smart guy. And I think that, and of course, has his own personal story of redemption following the penalty miss and so on. But and also the way he's reclaimed Englishness and the way he's reclaimed the national team, that a team that people actually love for who they are, rather than just for England. So yes, if Gareth Southgate would be a good one to do.
And what about anyone? Are you sort of more drawn to the sports?
No, I mean,
what about non-sport? Any politicians?
Good question. Any politicians? Trying to think of any politicians who possibly inspire me. Well, I don't know. No, I don't know how to think about that. They, I mean, this is
not necessarily.
We're doing this the day after Prince Harry's memoir was announced. But he's already got one. He's got a very good one actually. He's got a guy called J.R. Moringa who not only wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning memoir of his own, but also did Andre Agassi's Open, which is one of the best sports autobiographies ever. So
that will be very interesting.
Yes. So I can't think of a politician who I would desperately like to.
No. I mean,
which may tell you more about our politicians than anything else. Maybe not especially.
It does. And just very quickly, just want to ask. So Messiah.
Yeah.
Your brilliant book. It became a great TV series. Did it? So when it gets transferred to TV, how much control do you have in how you want it to?
Well, I wrote the script for the first Messiah, so I had a reasonable amount of control. But otherwise, the casting choices, the directorial choices are not your own, and nor should they be. Hemingway had an old saying about how close writers should get to Hollywood, which is basically they should get no further than Lake Tahoe on the Nevada-California state line, and the writer should stay in Nevada, and the Hollywood exec should stay in California, and one should throw a bag of money over, and the other should toss the manuscript back.
Yeah.
So, and I have done adaptations and stuff before, and it's difficult if a writer really wants to be involved because it's a very different, it's a very different medium, and it's different ways of storytelling. So fundamentally, when you sell stuff to people, just accept that it's going to be totally different, and don't try and maintain control, because it's only ever going to end in tears. So unless you're so massive that you can exert reasonable control, J.K. Rowling did, James did with 50 Shades of Grey. But yeah, I don't get too bunched up about it. I'm not very precious about. I've worked hard and do stuff. I've just written one set in North Korea, a love story set in North Korea called The Law of the Heart. So if that ever comes to film, how much control I would get over that, I don't know. But again, I think you talk to people who want to adapt it, and you see what their ideas are, and if you like their ideas, then go for it. But accept that also, no matter whether the film or the TV is good or bad, your book is still the same.
Yes, exactly. It's not changing the book, is it?
Exactly.
No.
So,
true.
That's still there.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't get too bunched up about it.
No. Oh no. Well, yes, it would be quite stressful actually if you did get too
exactly
emotional about it.
Yeah, there's enough to get stressed about in life.
Yeah, no, quite right. Boris, thank you so much. I hope you haven't sort of died of heat.
No, it's
really. Such a hot day to be doing this. But thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to make sure we get lots of Grapevine members buying Leap of Faith.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I hope they will all enjoy it, and I'm sure
I'm sure they'll love it, and I can't wait to read it myself.
Brilliant. I will make sure Frankie sends you a signed one.
Oh God, no, you don't. Thank you so much, Boris.
My pleasure.